Seriously, what is this run-down, filthy place? You have absolute zero sense of picking a restaurant.
This dinner gathering had been set up by me at my mother-in-law, Karen's insistence. Though she criticized it as expected, she was in high spirits with her wine, so that was a small relief. Besides, today we had other relatives gathered around, so I figured she wouldn't go too far with her complaints. "I'm sorry for not being more helpful," I muttered softly with an awkward smile. Then suddenly my father-in-law, Richard, stood up sharply. Had I done something wrong? Seeing this unusual intensity in the usually calm Richard, I shut my eyes tight in fear. The weight of everyone's stares felt like needles pricking my whole body.
Then why don't you go home?
He said with a coldness I'd never heard from him before, sending a chill down my spine.
What?
Richard had finally hit back. "My name is Emily Sanders, 32 years old. Soon, it'll be our first wedding anniversary. My husband, Chris, graduated from a prestigious university and now works for a well-known company. He never flaunts his accomplishments, and instead he kindly offers, let's split the household chores. Since I work part-time and have more free time, I handle most of the chores. But on his days off, Chris cooks, and I always look forward to his delicious meals."
Emily, here you go. Today I made some croquettes with big chunks of meat.
We don't have kids yet. The weekends we spend together are our little oasis. We both want children, but we're also enjoying this time just for the two of us. Or at least, that's what I tell him. Secretly, I have my own hesitations about having kids. When our relaxing weekend came to an end, it was back to Monday. I finished my shift and returned home around 4 p.m. and, as usual, she was there. Karen, standing poised and refined, right in the entryway of our apartment building.
Welcome back, Emily. Must have been a long day at work.
"Oh, well, hi, Karen. Yes, I just got back." Karen often drops by the apartment where Chris and I live. She's always waiting for me at the entrance after work, and somewhere along the line, she's become friendly with the neighbors. Today, as usual, she was chatting away with a few neighbors her age, apparently passing the time while waiting for me.
You work so hard every day. I brought a little something to add to tonight's dinner. Please, enjoy it if you'd like.
This dinner gathering had been set up by me, at Karen's insistence. I forced a small smile in return, feeling the dry corner of my lips crack painfully. I kept the pain from showing. "Oh, thank you so much. Would you like to join me for tea?" "Only if it's no bother. Please feel free."
Thank you. In that case, I'll take you up on it. I always enjoy our chats, Emily.
The neighbor's eyes widened in surprise.
You're quite close with your daughter-in-law, aren't you?
Emily is so sweet and genuine. I can't help but dote on her. Honestly, we're closer than most real mothers and daughters, and it's all thanks to Emily.
With a softened expression, Karen boasted about our wonderful family bond. After saying goodbye to the neighbors, we walked side by side to my apartment, seemingly the picture of a harmonious in-law relationship.
I made beef stew for you today. It's your favorite, isn't it, Emily?
"Oh yes, it is. I love it."
Remember, the first time we cooked beef stew together, you...
Laughing over trivial memories, we stepped into the apartment. Then, in the instant the front door clicked shut, her demeanor shifted entirely. The calm smile vanished, and she closed in on me with a low, harsh voice.
What was that attitude just now?
In a mocking gesture, she stuck out her lower lip and hunched over as if mimicking my nervous posture.
If it's all right, may I offer you some tea, if it's no trouble?
When she was done with her exaggerated, scornful impression, she switched back to her usual domineering tone.
Why so timid? Couldn't you just say, "Oh, please join me for tea, Karen?" With a bit more spirit? Honestly, if the neighbors start getting a weird impression of me because of your attitude, what then?
Sorry. I tried my best to play the cheerful, adoring daughter-in-law she wanted, but clearly I wasn't up to her standards. She shoved the container of stew toward me, and some of the broth leaked out. To her, it was just a prop to present herself as the ideal mother-in-law. Though I knew it irritated her, it was also somehow satisfying when Chris praised his mom's cooking, especially since it eased some of my own load. I held the sticky container and forced out my thanks. Thank you so much. For everything. Karen and I get along so well, there's no hint of any typical in-law tensions. Everyone, from the neighbors to my husband and even Richard, believes that. But I am the only one who ever sees her harsher side. It reminded me of when Chris and I were first engaged.
Emily is such a lovely person, so gentle and homely. I felt so relieved. Please take care of Chris.
When we visited to formally announce our engagement, my future in-laws gave us their heartfelt congratulations. Karen didn't just praise me, she also gave Chris a bit of advice.
But remember, Chris, no matter how homey your wife may be, you shouldn't just leave all the housework to her. It's important to balance work and home. You need to be there to support Emily.
I felt truly welcomed as part of the family, and it made me happy.
Oh, I should have made Chris help out around the house more often. Maybe I'll have to pop in now and then to make sure he's being a good husband.
Richard laughed at her joke.
That's true. These days, the old school man of the house thing doesn't fly. But we shouldn't meddle too much in our kids' marriage either.
Hey, that's not even funny, Mom. Seriously, spare me that.
Chris looked adorably flustered. The first time I saw Karen's true nature was after the wedding ceremony, honeymoon, and during the blissful early days of marriage.
Wow, this place is a mess.
As she had warned on our engagement day, Karen arrived for a surprise inspection of our home. But instead of checking if Chris was pulling his weight as a husband, she was scrutinizing whether I measured up as a wife. She came unannounced while Chris was at work and looked through every corner of her apartment. Seeing some half-eaten bread on the table and a pan left in the sink, she sighed dramatically.
You can't even clean up properly as a woman. Chris really married a useless wife. What a disappointment.
Her drastic change in attitude was so shocking that, for a moment, I wondered if this was even the same woman. Maybe she had a twin or was just two-faced. Over the past year, I've come to understand all too well. Karen is incredibly charming outwardly, but in private, she's manipulative, harassing me in ways that only I can see. Of course, I tried talking to Chris about my struggles with his mother. Instead of directly mentioning her harassment, I simply said I felt uncomfortable with her dropping by when he wasn't home. Kind-hearted Chris took my side completely and gently addressed the issue with his mom. He did it so tactfully that neither of us came out looking like the bad guy.
I'd love to see you too when you visit, Mom. So could you come when I'm home?
Oh, is that so? I just enjoyed the girl talk between the two of us. But are you getting a little jealous of how close we are, Chris? Really, it's time to cut those apron strings.
With that, she accepted it with a hint of pride, seemingly pleased with his response. I thought the matter was resolved, but her visits didn't stop.
You told Chris something, didn't you? Don't think I can't see through your little schemes. Don't go telling him things you shouldn't.
She only pressured me more. After that, she became even more of a kind, loving mother-in-law. To everyone she met, she would boast about how I was a wonderful wife, thus raising her own reputation in the process. Before I knew it, she'd managed to build up her image so thoroughly that there was no way I could ever say, "Actually, my mother-in-law." Now everyone assumes I'm delighted to see her when she visits. Honestly, I've become too afraid of shattering the good wife image she's crafted for me. Since she's painted me as this gentle, domestic wife, it would be all too easy for her to destroy that image if she wanted. Before I knew it, I started feeling anxious, thinking, if I go against my sweet mother-in-law, Chris might resent me, and everyone else might look down on me. Even when Chris asks if I'm uncomfortable with his mother, I can only give a weak smile to avoid worrying him. We just get along well as women. Each time we meet, Karen makes a pointed remark.
It's been a year since you got married now. You do understand why such a capable man like Chris married someone as useless as you, right?
Oh, yes. She makes me repeat the humiliating words clearly. I am an incompetent woman who can only manage housework and work halfway. I am grateful to Chris, an exceptional man, for marrying me despite this. My role is to support him to the best of my ability. According to Karen, Chris once considered calling off the engagement before we married. She told me he had realized just how useless I was.
Emily may be clumsy, but she's obedient and honest, so you should marry her.
Karen claimed that she had strongly encouraged him. And thanks to her, I am now happily married to Chris. Both Chris and Richard are as kind as ever. Still, I can't shake the feeling that they too have hidden sides just like Karen.
Richard said you're a bit slow on the uptake, Emily. And Chris told me the other day he didn't enjoy dinner, but forced himself to eat it.
Karen shares these tidbits with me. I take it as her way of showing kindness, wanting me to see others' true feelings and adjust my behavior accordingly. So I'm always cheerful around Richard and make a point of serving drinks for him. And at home, I always prepare at least 5 dishes for each meal. Though Chris and Richard often tell me not to push myself, I know better than to take that at face value. Every act of kindness leaves me wondering, what did they mean by that? In the midst of these exhausting days, Karen assigned me the task of organizing a family gathering. It was to be a celebration for Richard's retirement, bringing together close relatives. Someone as incompetent as me? Surely, I'm not up to the responsibility. As I worried, Richard added more pressure.
I'm really touched that everyone's coming together to celebrate me. Actually, it's also our 40th wedding anniversary this year.
So, am I now expected to include an anniversary celebration as well? I couldn't even voice my doubts. You can count on me. I hated myself for answering that way. Unable to confide in anyone, I pushed forward, full of unease. Finally, the day of the celebration arrived. Gathered together were Chris and me, my in-laws, as well as Richard's siblings and their families. The restaurant I booked was an old, high-end establishment. Not exactly well-known, without even an official website. Still, I thought it would be a safe choice. But, standing outside, the place felt older than I'd anticipated. Sure enough, when I glanced over, Karen's face darkened. But then, she quickly softened her expression and began patting my shoulder briskly.
Oh, what a charming place with so much character. Emily found and booked this for us. Thank you so much. That must have been a lot of work. Everyone, let's enjoy a wonderful meal here at Emily's recommendation. With her great taste and cooking skills, I'm sure this place will be simply delicious. I can't wait.
While praising me, she subtly raised everyone's expectations. Seeing the look of anticipation on everyone's faces made me so nervous that I could only look down with a strained smile. In the private room, I sat in the seat closest to the door, with Karen beside me. Everyone enjoyed their meals along with some drinks. The food, which I had worried about, turned out to be delicious, and the service was excellent. Just as the atmosphere started to liven up, Karen leaned over to speak to me.
Everyone's being polite and saying it's tasty because they're all adults, you know.
She had also been drinking. Though she leaned close as if whispering, her voice sounded as loud as usual to me.
Seriously, what is this rundown, filthy place? You have absolute zero sense of picking a restaurant.
As expected, she had her criticisms, but Karen seemed to be in high spirits. It looked like she was satisfied just being able to enjoy some drinks. Most importantly, with everyone watching, I figured she wouldn't push things further tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't be of more help. I muttered an awkward apology with a wry smile. But in the next instant, the room fell silent. At that same moment, Richard stood up abruptly. Oh, did I make some mistake? Seeing his uncharacteristically stern expression, a chill ran down my spine, and I shut my eyes tightly. It felt like everyone's gaze was piercing through me, making my whole body ache.
Then why don't you just leave?
The ice-cold tone in his voice, which I'd never heard before, sent a shiver down my spine.
What?
Karen, with a half-smile, spoke up.
Wait, honey, what's going on? Oh, I get it. Are you upset because the steak was a bit rare? Or maybe the stew was too bland? Oh, wait, it's probably because the waiter's attitude wasn't great, right? I mean, that subtle smile felt a bit condescending, didn't it?
With her eyebrows drawn in an exaggeratedly troubled expression, Karen tried to calm him down.
I understand you're upset, dear, but let's not forget that Emily here picked this place and made the reservation, all while juggling her job. She chose this place for you after all. Sure, it might be a bit of an odd choice, but let's focus on appreciating Emily's efforts instead, all right?
Outwardly considerate, Karen tried to diffuse his anger on my behalf. But her words, which subtly lifted herself while putting me down, pierced my heart. I really can't do anything right.
Sorry, didn't mean to pick such a disappointing place.
Huh?
Richard's anger hadn't subsided at all. In fact, I could see a vein twitching near his temple, amplifying his intensity.
If you don't like the place, you're welcome to leave.
Wait, leave? Me?
Confused, Karen, who thought she was defending me, suddenly found herself facing his wrath.
What? What did I do?
You said this was a rundown, filthy place, didn't you? Maybe you've had a bit too much and can't hear yourself talking.
What?
Apparently, everyone in the room had heard her earlier comments. With drinks loosening her up and the lively atmosphere, Karen seemed to lose control over her volume.
It's disappointing to hear you badmouth this place.
Taking a deep breath, Richard spoke.
This place holds memories for us, doesn't it? It's been 40 years. Have you forgotten?
After a moment of thought, Karen let out a small.
Whoa.
It seemed like she was starting to remember something.
When we were getting married, your parents were strongly against it, weren't they? They couldn't understand why you'd marry someone like me, an ordinary man with an average job. I suppose it's natural for parents to worry about marrying off their beloved daughter. You were truly beautiful back then. I wasn't the kind of man who could match up to someone like you.
Actually, I had heard this story from Richard while selecting the venue for tonight. At the time, he was just a regular employee with no special position, while Karen was a stunning beauty who drew attention from men. He had chosen this very restaurant to try to convince her reluctant parents, hoping to show them how deeply he cared for her.
This is the place where I conveyed how much I loved and cherished you. The place where I finally got your parents to approve our marriage. This is a special place for me, but it seems it doesn't mean as much to you.
Oh, that's right, maybe. But my parents passed away long ago, so, well, memories from so far back, I don't remember too well.
Since I had heard this story, I had chosen this restaurant, hoping it would be meaningful for them. But who could have guessed that it didn't leave much of an impression on her? No wonder Richard was hurt. But looking up at him, I saw that his expression carried more anger than sadness.
Honestly, I figured you'd have forgotten. You probably prefer flashy high-end places, don't you?
What?
Every time he spoke, Karen could only reply with a shocked, "What?" Usually gentle and quiet, Richard was unusually talkative tonight. That alone must have felt strange to her.
I knew, that you were being taken to other nice restaurants by other men.
Huh? Oh.
A strangled sound escaped her lips.
I was such a fool. I fell for your charm, your brightness, and kindness. By the time I realized you were messing around with other men, Chris had already been born. So I kept quiet all these years. But now that Chris is married, he's an adult, and it wouldn't matter if his parents divorced.
No way.
In a panic, she looked toward Chris, who responded with a steady expression.
Yeah, it'd be fine if you divorced.
No way.
Sitting slumped beside me, she seemed utterly defeated, and I couldn't find the words to comfort her. As I hesitated, Richard continued.
Of course, divorce would be inconvenient now, wouldn't it? You're older, so men don't pay you the same attention, and you still haven't gotten any of my parent inheritance.
What?
It was as if Richard saw straight through her intentions. It seems Karen, who was popular with men, decided to marry Richard because he was the son of a wealthy family. Even though Richard was just a regular employee, he worked for a major company. She relied on his kindness, lived freely as she pleased, and seemed to be counting on eventually inheriting a sizable fortune. But his parents, elderly though they are still alive and well, happily residing in a care facility.
No, I don't want a divorce. Do you even have proof I cheated? Actually, it doesn't matter if you do. Sure, maybe I had a little fun now and then. But that was over 10 years ago. It's ancient history. Right, Rachel?
Karen, desperate, turned to Richard's sister, who was also there. Rachel just frowned and shook her head slightly.
Who knows?
It seemed she wasn't going to take her side, even as a fellow woman. Karen's face, which had been pale, flushed red in an instant.
Fine. Why are you being so mean all of a sudden? It's cruel to bring up things from the past and talk about divorce now. Sure, I might have played around a little, but I always took care of the family. Look at Chris. He turned out so well because I provided a stable home.
She covered her angry, wrinkled face with her hands. Instead of unleashing her anger, she suddenly burst into tears. The sound was piercing, and the heat radiating off her clung to me, making it hard to ignore. Since she was right next to me, I had no choice but to lean away, creating a bit of distance.
Emily.
Just as I thought I had some space, she suddenly clung to me. Caught off guard, I couldn't pull away, and my body tensed up.
You're on my side, right, Emily? Forget about your father-in-law. Let him regret it. I'll just stay at your and Chris's place for a while, okay?
Wait. I was too stunned to respond. How did it come to this? The last thing I wanted was to live with her, but I couldn't refuse her directly.
No, that's not happening.
Huh? The grip she had on me loosened. Chris, with a calm expression, repeated himself.
What are you talking about? There's no way that's happening.
Rejected outright by her own son, Karen stared, mouth agape. Her expression begged, "Why?" Chris replied in a steady voice.
Because I don't like you, Mom.
He said it as casually as a good morning, without any tension.
I married Emily because I love her. Anyone who hurts the person I care about, I can't stand them, even if it's my own mother.
Chris said it so straightforwardly. While I was still processing everything, Chris put an arm around my shoulders.
Don't worry, Emily. I don't resent you at all. I know Mom's been trying to fill your head with lies like Chris just puts up with you. None of that's true.
I always averted my gaze, but now he leaned in to meet my eyes. When I looked up, he gave me a warm smile. There was no way that smile could be a lie. Then, what was it that I had feared about Chris's supposed true face? Nervously looking up, I noticed the stern expressions on Richard and his relatives had softened into gentle smiles.
What lies? I was only trying to be nice to Emily. I didn't tell any lies.
Karen shouted defiantly. But I couldn't recall a single moment of genuine kindness in her behavior. Watching her lose control like this, even I, slow as I am, could see clearly who the real liar was. Wait, so all this time, I thought you were the one holding this family together, that you were keeping Chris and Dad from getting fed up with me, maybe even stopping them from divorcing me because I'm useless. Was that wrong? Gathering my courage, I voiced my thoughts, and Chris pulled me even closer.
No, that's not true. I married you because I love you. None of that makes any sense.
Relief washed over me, and tears began to slip down my cheeks. Before I knew it, I was crying. Chris's warm smile faded as he turned a steely gaze to his mother.
I know you've been tormenting Emily, making her believe we were bad-mouthing her, trying to brainwash her. You manipulated her like that.
His voice never rose, but the pressure was intense as he confronted her. Karen shook, glancing around for support. But everyone's eyes were filled with disdain. Realizing she had no allies, she clenched her teeth in frustration.
So, I'm the bad guy now? All I did was try to guide Emily with a few helpful tips. Don't gang up on me.
Shaking with anger and desperation, she cried out, looking exactly like the villain.
Guidance? More like harassment. Lying to make her feel isolated. That's what you call a mother-in-law's role? You're the real bad guy here.
Chris's calm, flat tone only made her look more pitiful. Trapped, Karen slammed her fists on the table.
What's wrong with you all? Daughters-in-law are supposed to obey their mother-in-law's opinions. Respect your elders. I'm the authority here. So what if I gave her a hard time? I should be praised for helping her grow.
She shouted louder and louder. No matter how loudly she spoke, it was clear no one was siding with her. Unable to stand the cold atmosphere, she kept pounding on the table. The beer glass on the table rattled, looking absurdly out of place. Suddenly, she grabbed the glass. Beer splashed through the air as she lifted it, lunging toward me. Oh no, she's going to do it. Instinctively, I shut my eyes and curled up. But even after bracing myself, nothing hit me. Peeking out cautiously, I saw my uncle-in-law had caught her raised arm. Karen struggled, trying to shake him off, but he twisted her wrist until she dropped the glass.
Ouch, stop it, let go.
Her cries sounded pained and almost elderly, but her face twisted with rage. Without loosening his grip, my uncle pinned her down to the floor.
If you resist any more, I'll arrest you on the spot.
What? You look more like a robber doing this to me. How dare you, a big man, use force on me?
And moved by her taunts, my uncle replied in a stern voice.
Because of your resistance, I now have scratch marks on my arm, and that beer you threw dripping from my hair. Shall I arrest you right now for assault?
Karen, finally noticing the beer running down his hair, muttered.
Oh,
Coming to her senses, her face turned ghostly pale. Though she stopped resisting, my uncle did not let her go.
You must have forgotten. I am, after all, still an active duty police officer.
Come to think of it, I remember hearing once. Richard's brother is a police officer, and his wife, who was standing behind him with her arms crossed, is also in the same profession. My uncle-in-law made her sit down on her knees. Since she was looking down, Chris grabbed her head and made her look forward. As he forced her to look up, our eyes met.
Do you have anything to say to Emily?
Even after all this, Karen just stammered. Finally, I realized I'd been deceived by her. Chris and Richard were never my enemies. It suddenly felt strange that I'd gone along with her demands out of respect for Chris's parents. Tentatively, I began to speak. Why did I only believe what you told me, Mom? Chris was always there for me, but I couldn't fully trust him. I'm so sorry, Chris. It was like a spell had broken. The fog before my eyes lifted, and everything came into focus. I realized it had been a long time since I'd looked directly at Chris. His relieved, gentle smile was so comforting.
what nonsense. I did nothing wrong. Back in the day, daughters-in-law weren't allowed to defy their mothers-in-law. This generation of women is so soft. I'm innocent.
She was the only one still raising a ruckus, and her presence was nothing but unpleasant. I looked at her with pity, my brow furrowing. She seemed ready to strike me again, but my uncle-in-law restrained her immediately. Then my aunt stood up.
Claiming innocence won't hold up here. I'm afraid we have clear evidence against you.
What?
Adjusting her glasses, my aunt closed in on her.
You may think you've done nothing wrong, but you're the only one who believes that. Chris recorded the insults you directed at Emily. Plus, we've gathered statements from neighbors who heard your shouting on several occasions.
Wait.
With her professional demeanor, my aunt, a lawyer, was direct and unyielding. I recalled being impressed by how well-educated M. Richard's family was when I first married Chris. After all, Richard was a successful employee at a major corporation, and the three siblings had clearly received top-notch educations. It was no wonder that Karen had targeted Richard for his family's wealth. Surrounded by a police officer and a lawyer, Karen shrank and trembled. She must have looked down on this family as all brains, no sense, convinced they'd never catch on to her games.
This can't be.
It dawned on me that Karen was the only one who thought she was fooling everyone with her perfect mother-in-law act. I hadn't noticed how poisoned I'd become by her words, but apparently even the neighbors had grown suspicious. As it turns out, her outbursts had carried right through the open windows, loud and clear. Having lived in a detached house with a yard, she never realized her voice could reach outside. Now, wide-eyed, she stared blankly, mouth open, forgetting even to blink. Her sagging cheeks drooped helplessly, pulled down by gravity.
Emily, I'm so sorry for all the pain you've gone through. At first, I thought Mom was genuinely happy to welcome you, but by the time I realized something was wrong, you were already afraid of even me. I'm sorry for making you wait until I had irrefutable evidence against her.
If I had still been under her influence, I probably wouldn't have believed Chris, and Karen would have talked her way out of it somehow. I was touched that Chris had prepared all of this for me.
Oh, so even my own son would betray me. This whole dinner was set up by your father just to trap me, wasn't it?
That's right.
Chris answered her matter-of-factly, without even raising his voice, his detached tone only further irritating her.
You're all against me. Ugh, I did nothing wrong.
Suddenly, she began hopping like a monkey, her outburst shocking everyone. With surprising agility for her age, she dashed toward the room's entrance. But her escape was already blocked. Standing in front of the exit with his arms crossed was their young nephew. With his bulging arm muscles, he looked every bit the strong and imposing figure, and Karen hesitated at the sight of him. Richard's family is full of reliable people, truly impressive. It seems she never really stood a chance marrying into this family. Better luck next time.
Fine, I did nothing wrong.
Karen's bitter excuses echoed emptily. Watching her stubbornly refuse to admit her mistakes, I suddenly felt the absurdity of it all.
Whether you're right or wrong isn't up to you to decide. For now, why don't you just leave? You seem to enjoy yourself eating and drinking, but clearly you don't care for this rundown place.
Even though she'd been told to leave, she returned to her seat, grabbed the remaining steak with her bare hands, and shoved it into her mouth. Her bizarre behavior left everyone speechless. While she'd apparently found the restaurant shabby, it seemed she at least liked the food. With her mouth full, she glared back at us one last time before finally leaving. We silently watched her go, behaving like a wild animal. Later, I heard she spent her time alternating between shouting and sobbing. In the end, Richard filed for divorce, and she protested endlessly, saying she didn't want it. However, she was in no position to refuse.
Wasn't your affair just 10 years ago? Too bad. But that's not long enough for the statute of limitations to have passed. If you don't want to be sued for damages, sign the divorce papers now.
My aunt, a lawyer, stepped in and the divorce was finalized. She couldn't pay any settlement. Richard didn't need her money though. He just wanted her gone. Of course, life after the divorce left her struggling financially. She was given a small settlement out of pity, but for someone used to a life of comfort, it was a pittance. Naturally, her attention turned to me. Returning home from work one evening, I found her waiting in the entryway of my apartment building.
Welcome home, Emily. You must be tired from work today.
Since that family dinner, I hadn't seen her face. I was honestly shocked that she would just show up as if nothing had happened. She looked mostly the same, though now her hairline was graying and the ends looked dry.
Emily, everyone seems to think I'm the bad guy here, but I was the only one who truly cared about you. Just between us, Chris really did say bad things about you to me. I don't want to criticize my own son, but he's always been difficult. That whole dinner, he conspired with his father to humiliate me. That's all the proof you need, right?
Seeing her fake tears gave me chills. Oh, really?
Yes, I was set up by Chris and his father, and now I'm living in a run-down apartment. I even had to start working part-time at my age. Just think, his father is retired now, So why am I the only one who has to suffer like this? Emily, can you secretly lend me a bit of support?
Despite her tears, her confident request for financial help left me puzzled. Her perfectly done makeup hadn't even smudged a bit. Her face was marked with deep wrinkles, but I could still tell she had been beautiful in her youth. Surely you have other men you can rely on besides Chris's father? Even in her later years, she still radiated that aura. She broke off her fake sobbing and twisted her mouth slightly.
What? Is that a dig at me? Since I turned 50, I've hardly been able to have any serious relationships with men. It's just boring, no excitement. Then Chris got married, and I had a blast getting close to you, Emily.
So it turns out I'd been a convenient distraction for her boredom. While I'd been suffering under the weight of her meddling, she must have enjoyed every minute of it. Lost in thought, I was startled when she suddenly squeezed my hand.
So please, Emily, you're the only one I can ask for help. I'm begging you, save me.
I felt a pang of pity for her rough, dry hands. However, I can't help you.
What? Why not? Your mother's zero-in-law is in trouble, and you won't help. Oh, I see. Chris must be bad-mouthing me to you now, right? Don't believe a word of it.
Her previous meekness vanished. She started spitting her words out. I held her gaze unflinching. Chris hasn't said a single bad thing about you. I don't know if he's ever complained about me to you, and I can't guess what he truly thinks. But I trust Chris, not you. When I said it, her grip loosened in shock. She must not have expected me to speak up against her. Taking the opportunity, I freed my hand, stepped back without saying goodbye, and entered the elevator.
Hey, stop right there. You can't just run away. It's a wife's duty to take care of her mother-in-law. Get back here.
The elevator doors closed just before she could reach me, cutting her off. As her ranting continued, I decided to call my uncle, the police officer. If only she had settled down quietly in her rundown apartment with her part-time job. Even though Richard divorced her on good terms, she just couldn't help but cause her own ruin. She tried to corner me several more times after that, but finally, my young, muscular nephew took matters into his own hands. When he showed up with a dozen or so of his friends and surrounded Karen, she was so scared that she turned tail and fled. Just the sight of those intimidating men must have made her feel like her life was at risk. It was far more effective than the police warnings. Of course, my nephew and his friends aren't actually dangerous. They're just wholesome young guys who were on the rowing team back in college. We could have pressed charges for her attempted attack, but Richard felt that prison would be too lenient. In a place with guaranteed shelter, food, and even friends who share a similar background, she'd likely settle in quite comfortably. I could picture her trying to live easily by playing the frail old woman. So instead, Richard decided that a more fitting punishment would be to leave her isolated in society, struggling to survive with no family and no one to rely on. Richard only apologized to me and never expressed any resentment, but I sensed his quiet anger. Left all alone, Karen now has no choice but to work to keep herself fed each day. Since moving out of that apartment, my life has been free of stress. And on top of that, Chris and I had a baby.
Oh, come here, come to Grandpa.
Richard is completely smitten with the baby. A huge shift from the reserved, quiet man he used to be.
So cute, so precious.
Yeah, she's adorable, isn't she? Look at those big eyes, just like Emily's. She's the cutest.
Looking at their doting faces, anyone could tell how much they love this baby, even without a special talent for reading minds.